Machu Picchu, one of the 7 wonders of the world, has reopened for tourists after remaining closed for 25 days due to the civil unrest in Peru since last December.
High in the clouds sits a city that should have fallen apart 100 times, yet it keeps breathing through storms and quakes, as if the mountain itself is keeping score. In 2025, scientists finally looked beneath the postcard and found the rulebook the Incas were following all along.
Penico has been chronologically identified as dating back to at least 1800 BC. As you can see, it's a long period.
They didn't fight the ridge. They partnered with it. Ready to hear how a lost city used cracks, water, and gravity like hidden code, and why everything you thought you knew about Machu Picchu is about to tilt. The century that got it backwards. When Hiram Bingham hacked through cloud forest in 1911 and stepped onto a ridge where terraces hover above a river shaped like a dark serpent, the headlines wrote themselves and the labels arrived fast. Royal estate sounded glamorous. Fortress sounded bold. Sanctuary sounded reverent. None of those outfits answered the stubborn questions that stick to stone once the cameras leave. Where were the huge markets a permanent city needs? Why do the elegant gardens feel sized for ceremonies and seasons rather than year-round provisioning? Why do the bones lean toward workers and attendants instead of family lines that whisper of generations on the same slope? The ridge is a razor. Rain beats the site for months. Trails climb like tests. If the Inca were the logistics masters who stitched half a continent with roads and depots, why crown a place that punishes mistakes? Scholars mapped every sunline and measured joints so tight a blade cannot slip, and the puzzle only sharpened. Precision lives everywhere, yet permanence is selective, as if the city was tuned to occasions, councils, and sky clocks rather than daily bustle. The terraces look like steps to the heavens, but they also read like carefully placed anchors. The temples drink light with a timing that feels intentional rather than decorative. The pathways narrow in ways that slow crowds and focus attention. Nothing about this plan says accident. It says design with a purpose we kept misreading because we wanted a palace in the clouds when the mountain was offering something stranger and smarter. Maybe the story we kept repeating was the pretty one that photographs well, while the real logic hid in the ground. What if the answer was never on the surface at all? What if the mountain itself was the missing voice we forgot to ask? And what would it say if we finally listened? The place that should not exist. From a respectful distance, Machu Picchu looks inevitable, the way a skyline looks inevitable after 1,000 postcards. But a practical mind hears a different rhythm. The ridge is narrow and windy. The drops on all sides are not metaphors. The Urubamba waits below like a black comma at the end of every careless step. Moving food, tools and stone to that elevation without wheels or draft animals sounds like a sentence no planner would write on purpose. Add the twitch of Andean tremors and the hammer of seasonal rain, and you have a list of reasons to build anywhere else. Yet the Inca did not choose easy ground. They chose precise ground. That implies trade-offs. It hints at a gain hiding inside the very hazards we keep listing. The gardens are elegant because the city was never meant to be a belly. The paths are steep because the place was never meant to be busy. The layout reads like a stage designed for rare alignments, for councils that needed privacy from the valleys, for rites that braid sky, water, and stone into a memory the empire could return to when it needed to think clearly. The ridge is not a mistake. It is a filter. Only people and moments with a reason to climb arrive. Look closely, and you see a choreography that privileges meaning over crowding, vantage points that prioritize horizons over storefronts, storage that looks strategic rather than domestic, a city that glows most brightly at certain hours of light and certain seasons of the calendar. What looks reckless through a market lens reads as intelligent through a ritual lens. So if the choice still feels reckless to us, perhaps we are grading the wrong assignment. What could a knife edge offer that a comfortable valley never can? And why does that offer make sense only if you listen to what the mountain is already doing? The 2025 breakthrough beneath the stones. The plot turned when geologists joined the archaeologists and asked the question that should have been first. What is happening inside the mountain? Instead of staring at walls, they looked through them. Satellites traced hairline fractures like threads on a hidden compass. Ground-based resistivity watched currents slip along cracks. Muon tomography, a cosmic X-ray that reads density, painted the bedrock like a living bone. Different tools, same map. Machu Picchu sits where major fault systems cross in a giant natural X. Modern builders see faults and think hazard tape. Inca engineers saw features. Cracks guide water. Cracks free stone. Cracks spread earthquake energy so shaking softens instead of snapping brittle pride. Cracks even sketch alignments you can build a temple around without inventing the compass twice. The mountain was pre-scored with instructions. The builders learned the script and wrote a city across it. Once you accept that the ground is not a blank page but a document already filled with lines and veins, the choice of site stops looking like a dare and starts reading like a perfect answer to a question the ridge asked. The ridge did not say fight me, it said follow me. It offered veins that could drink storms and pathways that could carry weight. It offered a quarry that renewed itself with every stress cycle. It offered a grid that matched the sky. If fractures can be veins, quarries, shock absorbers, and sight lines at the same time, what does a ridge city become when you treat those lines as code to follow rather than danger to flee? Water that keeps a city alive. Everyone photographs the fountains. The miracle is the plumbing you never see. A spring at the perfect elevation feeds a carved canal that threads through tiered basins like bright ribbon. Yet the showpiece is not the cascade. It is the habit of rain. This ridge takes storms that should unmake a city and persuades them to behave. Beneath plazas and paths lie thick beds of coarse stones that gulp down downpours before they can run wild. Layers of gravel above slow and spread the flow so it cannot cut channels. Breathing soil on top stays alive instead of packing hard. All of it drains into fractured granite that behaves like a lattice of veins, carrying excess water into the mountain rather than down the stairs. The terraces are not just photo-friendly fields. They are lungs and ribs. They hold weight. They vent water. They keep the ridge from slumping like wet bread. There are no pumps, no concrete pipes, no motors. There is only gravity, texture, slope, and patience. The design treats water as a partner to guide rather than a bully to block. That is why the place still looks crisp after 500 seasons of storms. It is civil engineering spoken in the mountain's accent. If water is the rulemaker in the high Andes, and a city can turn the rulemaker into an ally, what else gets easier the moment you stop pretending you can win a fight against rain? The mountain that cut the blocks. Granite has a reputation for stubbornness, yet here the stones marry so cleanly that rain gives up on finding a seam. That tempts people to whisper about lost metals and secret machines until you watch what stress does to rock. Faulting loads granite with tension. Tension creates planes that want to part. Planes that want to part are invitations if you know how to ask. The quarry was the ridge underfoot. Crews read thin lines at the surface, drove wooden wedges, added water, waited for swelling, and coaxed clean splits from blocks already halfway free. Hammerstones dressed edges with the patience of people who understand that time is another tool. Long faces bridged short seams. Keys locked corners. You can see the logic in every wall where stones nest like thoughts that were meant to meet. Once you see the process, the joinery stops looking supernatural and starts looking like the natural consequence of listening to stone that had already done half the work. When your inventory lies under your boots, logistics shrink and precision scales. The mountain offered pre-cut modules. People supplied rhythm, leverage, and judgment. If the rock is already telling you where to tap and how to lift, is the smartest technology the chisel, or is it the patience to listen? Choreography on a knife-edge ridge. Forget heavy equipment. Picture crews that move like a single organism, because on this ledge, the most important tool was sequence. Paths were prepared with smooth beds, so friction dropped and leverage ruled. Ramps rose with the walls and then vanished back into terraces once their job was done. Nothing wasted. Everything reused. Foremen read faces like tailors read cloth, keying polygonal stones so pressure traveled through the wall rather than dying in a corner. Long blocks stitched across weakness. Short blocks filled and locked. Ropes braided from plant fiber held more than you think when they worked with pulleys and patient timing. Water split stubborn seams when wooden wedges swelled at the right moment. Teams moved weight with calls and counters rather than noise and speed. Craft replaced spectacle. Safety came from cadence. The job site left almost no scars that did not become part of the finished city. That is why the place feels inevitable. The build was a rehearsal for the life to come. Watch the way stair runs land on platforms that also serve as work stages. Notice how quarries become plazas once the stone is lifted out. The city seems to grow from itself because construction was planned as transformation rather than intrusion. If you can turn gravity into a teammate and time into your strongest material, when does a cliff stop being a liability and start becoming the ally that makes your best work possible? The hidden grid, spanning the Andes. Once the fault line X under Machu Picchu came into focus, researchers checked other hubs and kept seeing the same logic until the landscape lit like a network diagram. Cusco sits where fractures converge and rivers braid into a valley like arteries. Ollantaytambo stacks terraces on broken slopes that guide water naturally, while fortress walls lean into rock waves that grew from the earth like ribs. Springs cluster where faults cross. Storage houses perch on breezy saddles that keep grain dry all year. Checkpoints guard narrow passes, geology pinched for free. This is ethnogeology, the long memory of people who watched seasons, storms, and slides until land read like language. Routes follow stable benches rather than just shortest lines. Quarries open where stress has already done the heavy work. Shrines settle where sky events meet bedrock rules. You can follow the empire by following the subtle clues of geology, and you can predict strongholds by finding the same combinations of fractures, springs, and ridges. Perhaps Machu Picchu was less a suburb and more a node in a ritual circuit, a place tuned to counsel and timing rather than trade and daily churn. A city that glows brightest at particular hours and seasons is a city built to register meaning, not only to shelter lives. If the empire rode a hidden grid the mountains built, is it any surprise they could move armies and ideas with speed and grace while spending less energy than rivals who try to bulldoze their way through the same bones? Sacred logic that doubles as engineering to the Inca, peaks were apus, living guardians of valleys and people, and the earth was Pachamama, a mother who feeds and remembers. In that world, there is no sharp line between useful and holy. A spring is a blessing and a water system. A terrace is food and stability. A window that catches the solstice is a ritual and a calendar you can plant by. Excavations under key terraces reveal offerings of carved stones, marine shells from distant coasts, and the ash of fires that marked beginnings. Work began with alignment because alignment keeps humans in step with light, gravity, and flow. The famous carved stone perched like a sentinel is not a prop. It is a node in a sky clock that marks the high sun of summer and the low sun of winter and ties those moments to peaks that ring the ridge. That is not superstition. That is a double language where belief guides choices that last. Respect the slope like a living shoulder, and your walls will lean correctly. Honor the water source, and your city lives longer. Treat mountaintops as elders, and you choose sites the ground itself will support. When reverence becomes resilience by habit, why would you separate the sacred from the practical and lose the guidance that keeps your work standing? Earthquakes, that test instead of destroy faults, frighten modern builders because rigid plans hate movement, yet on fractured ground, shaking can spread and soften rather than break. And the masons leaned into that truth. Openings taper toward the top, so vertical loads find friendly shoulders instead of brittle lintels. Walls lean inward just enough to resist sway without overbuilding into arrogance. Polygonal stones interlock like vertebrae, so forces travel and dissipate rather than pile up where they can do harm. Mortar is absent on purpose because dry joints can breathe, settle, and reset without shattering. A long stone that bridges two courses turns a potential crack into a path for strength. A slight batter turns a flat surface into a quiet brace. When the valley groans, the city exhales and carries on. You can see the philosophy in small details that repeat like grammar. It is the language of survival written in block and plane. For a culture that read land like text, this is simply reading the sentence to the end. The ground will move. The wall will answer. The building will stay because it was never trying to freeze the earth into obedience. If your architecture knows how to breathe, does it fear the quake, or does it let the ground finish its thought and then return to work as if nothing has changed? The mindset that changes everything. Seen straight, Machu Picchu stops being a dare against nature and becomes a case study in listening. Staircases trace drain lines the ridge already wrote. Sight lines double as stress lines the bedrock already favors. Plazas rest on layered beds that distribute load like mattresses made of stone and air. Even the showpiece temples belong to a weight map that places mass where the mountain prefers to carry it. This is not miracle or myth. It is method. Learn the ground. Honor its moods. Put beauty on top of function rather than hiding function under beauty and hoping no one notices. The story also corrects our language. Local families never forgot this ridge or its springs. Indigenous knowledge about safe ground and patient maintenance kept terraces breathing when empires changed flags. Discovery is the wrong word for a place people never abandoned. Translation is closer to the truth. A city in the clouds reads as a collaboration between people and mountain, and that collaboration can be seen in the way the city still works. The drains still drain. The stairs still land where they should. The sightlines still catch the sun where the builders wanted it. If we give the land a writing credit, how many of our own habits change? And what happens to pride once the mountain is a co-author instead of a silent stage? The invisible masterpiece under your boots. Tourists point cameras at terraces and fountains, but more than half of Machu Picchu lives underground in layers that make storms boring, seasons predictable, and walls calm. Beneath plazas sit coarse stone beds that gulp deluges. Above them lie filters that keep soil from choking and foundations from wandering. Beneath the fountains run channels that tame fast water and prevent scour. This is an iceberg city, quiet structure below and elegance above. And the budget went into the part no traveller would praise. That is exactly why the visible part is still here to admire. How many modern projects fail because they reverse that priority, spending on glitter and starving the gut? The Inca put pride where the rain would judge it, not where the crowd would clap. They built habits into the ground that reward patience every rainy season. The reward is a skyline that survives 1,000 careless footsteps and 1,000 honest storms. Invisible work is the only reason beauty lasts. The test is brutal and simple. When the rain comes, does your plaza breathe? When the ground moves, does your wall talk to itself and settle? When the season turns, can your channel remember its path? If the answer is yes, the mountain nods. If the answer is no, the mountain answers in kind. Where should we put our effort first when we build in places that test us the way this ridge tests everyone who climbs it? The blueprint we need right now. This is where history stops being a museum and turns into a manual. Read the fractures instead of paving over them and acting surprised when cracks return through your failures. Let water move and help it along instead of boxing it in and calling it progress until a single afternoon proves you wrong. Make drainage and foundations the first draft, not the afterthought. Choose shapes that carry force the way bodies do and stop treating concrete like a spell that cancels gravity. Gravity is the boss. Water is the editor. Time is the reviewer who never lies. The Inca had no steel, no pumps, no wheels. Yet a ridge city they co-authored with a mountain still passes every storm and tremor we can throw at it, while brand new suburbs flood after one ugly cloudburst. That is not a tool problem. It is a listening problem. The lesson is not to copy the style. It is to copy the mindset. Start with the land, accept its rules, put beauty on top of obedience to the basics. Budget pride for the part of the project no one will see because the mountain will see it, and that is the only critic that matters. If a so-called lost city survived by turning danger into design, what excuse do we have to keep building as if the ground is an opponent instead of the partner that decides whether our work lives or dies? If this flipped your idea of Machu Picchu, hit like and share it with someone who still thinks it was just a palace in the clouds. Subscribe for more deep dives that rewrite the map. What detail surprised you most? The water veins or the fault line blueprint? Drop your take in the comments and then queue up our next story on your screen.